Number 1. Brittany Zamora. Before her name became one of the most searched teacher cases in America, Brittany Zamora was seen as the model of a modern educator. She was young, enthusiastic, tech-savvy, and spoke openly about wanting to connect with her students in ways she felt her own teachers never had. Colleagues described her as energetic, parents viewed her as trustworthy, and administrators saw her as someone who embraced every new digital tool placed in front of her. But that same comfort with technology would soon expose a hidden pattern of behavior that no one imagined was possible. Zamora was born in 1991 and raised in Arizona, where she excelled academically and gained a reputation for being responsible and self-driven. She married her longtime partner not long after finishing college, and the two presented themselves as a picture-perfect couple, building a quiet life together. By 2018, she had secured a teaching position at a charter school in Goodyear, where parents appreciated her communication style and her willingness to use apps, group chats, and classroom portals to keep students engaged. On the surface, everything appeared stable, but beneath that, a separate path was forming. The shift began gradually. Records later indicated that Zamora used classroom apps to communicate excessively with one specific student, a 13-year-old in her class. What started as casual messages eventually evolved into conversations outside school hours. Digital tools that were meant to assist learning became a secret corridor for blurred boundaries. The convenience of constant access lowered the usual barriers, and each day, the tone of these conversations drifted further from appropriate supervision and closer to something far more concerning. A small turning point came when messages began appearing late at night. The volume and intensity increased. One student became her focus. Group chats with several students slowly funneled into private exchanges. Nobody around her sensed the shift. In an era where communication happens everywhere and all the time, her conversations blended into the digital noise. But inside those messages, investigators would later find the first unmistakable indicators that this teacher-student dynamic had crossed a line. The main incident unfolded inside the school itself. According to later court records, Zamora arranged private moments with the student during class time, exploiting the structured environment of her own classroom to create opportunities that should never have existed. Authorities later reported that she closely monitored the movements of others to avoid being noticed. The fact that these incidents occurred during regular school hours, in a room filled with students only a few steps away, shocked the public when details emerged. The crime was not hidden in remote locations. It happened in the place children are meant to be safest. The truth surfaced after the student's parents noticed unusual behavior and gained access to his phone. What they found triggered an immediate call to police. Messages, call logs, and screenshots that documented the conversations between Zamora and their son. Investigators acted quickly. Detectives set up controlled communications, gathered evidence from the student's device, and confronted Zamora. She denied wrongdoing at first, but struggled to explain the volume and frequency of the conversations. A pivotal moment came when police released portions of the evidence publicly. Interrogation room footage circulated online. Text exchanges appeared across news networks. The digital trail painted a detailed timeline of the interaction. Because nearly every step of the misconduct occurred through technology, investigators had a clearer narrative than many cases ever allow. The evidence didn't rely on vague recollections or disputed memories. It existed in timestamps, chat logs, and data that could be verified. Her arrest in March 2018 led to immediate national attention, and within hours, her name was trending online. The story spread globally, fueled by the unusual amount of digital documentation. It wasn't just a case involving a teacher. It was a modern scandal where technology recorded everything and amplified it to millions. The public reacted not only to the crime, but to the ease with which it unfolded. For many parents, this case represented the darker side of digital access in schools. The courtroom phase moved quickly. Prosecutors charged Zamora with multiple felonies related to her conduct with the 13-year-old student. The defense initially challenged aspects of the evidence, but eventually entered into negotiations. In 2019, Zamora accepted a plea agreement. She was sentenced to 20 years in state prison, followed by lifetime probation and registration requirements after release. The judge cited the digital evidence, the repeated nature of the behavior, and the breach of trust as key factors in the outcome. In the aftermath, The school district faced heavy scrutiny. Parents questioned whether earlier signs had been missed or dismissed. Others focused on the broader issue: how technology had enabled a teacher to maintain unmonitored contact with students. Across the country, districts tightened digital communication policies, restricted messaging apps, and reviewed how teachers interacted with students outside of class. Zamora herself remains incarcerated, serving a long sentence that marks one of the most notorious teacher cases of the last decade. Her story stands as a stark reminder of how modern tools can be misused, and how trust, once broken, leaves a lasting shadow. The very technology designed to enhance learning became the mechanism that exposed her actions, turning a local case into one of the most viral teacher scandals in recent history. And as we move to the next case, we look at a story where the scale of notoriety wasn't driven by technology, but by a decades-long controversy that reshaped public perceptions of teacher misconduct forever. Number 2, Mary Kay Letourneau. Her story didn't begin with scandal. It began with a contradiction that baffled the public for years. She came from a prominent family, married young, had 4 children, built a respected career, and maintained the image of a disciplined, polished educator. Yet behind that stable exterior lived a pattern of emotional volatility, impulsive decisions, and unresolved personal conflict that slowly shaped the most infamous teacher case in American history. Mary Catherine Letourneau was born in 1962 into a politically connected California family. Her father was a well-known figure in local and national politics, and her childhood was steeped in strict expectations. Those who knew her described her as intelligent but sheltered, ambitious but insecure. She met her future husband, Steve Letourneau, while in college, and their marriage produced 4 children, but the couple struggled behind the scenes with infidelity, financial instability, and constant moves. The tension within the household became an undercurrent that Mary carried into her professional life. By the mid-1990s, she was working as a teacher in the Highline School District near Seattle. To colleagues, she was lively and creative. To students, she seemed approachable and encouraging. Nothing about her public persona suggested that her life was about to veer into a path that would dominate headlines across the world. The turning point came in 1996, when Letourneau began forming an unusual attachment to a 12-year-old student named Vili Fualao. What started as extra attention soon became time spent alone, then increasingly personal conversations. Friends later reported that she seemed emotionally adrift during this period, seeking validation wherever she could find it. That vulnerability escalated into a boundary collapse that defied logic and shocked even those closest to her. In early 1997, authorities learned of the relationship after a family member raised concerns. Letourneau initially denied everything, but investigators found enough evidence to move forward. She was soon arrested and charged. The incident stunned the Seattle community. A teacher with children of her own had crossed into territory that most people considered unimaginable. The main event that pushed the case into global exposure occurred shortly after her first arrest. While out on bail and under strict conditions, Letourneau continued seeing the student. This violation triggered a second arrest and solidified the case as one of the most notorious in modern American legal history. Prosecutors argued that she ignored every warning, every order, and every legal boundary. It was no longer just a crime, it was a complete rebellion against the court itself. News networks seized the story instantly. It wasn't only the age difference that drew attention, it was the combination of her background, her family reputation, her defiance of court orders, and the unusual emotional language she used to describe her actions. Interviews and statements created a narrative unlike anything seen before. She didn't express fear, she expressed attachment. She didn't speak like someone seeking forgiveness. She spoke like someone insisting on a connection that should never have existed. As investigators pieced together the timeline, the public watched in real time. This was one of the first major teacher cases to merge personal scandal with a media frenzy that never faded. Every update became a headline. Television crews camped outside courtrooms. Commentators debated psychology, boundaries, and legal responsibility. And as her pregnancy with the student's child became known, the story transformed from shocking to surreal. During the trial, prosecutors emphasized the repeated violations of the law, the disregard for court orders, and the profound breach of professional duty. The defense focused on Letourneau's emotional state and argued that her personal turmoil influenced her decisions. But the facts were overwhelming. In 1997, she accepted a plea agreement and received a sentence requiring treatment and lengthy supervision. The judge warned her explicitly. If she violated the conditions again, she would face years in prison. Months later, she violated them again. Detectives discovered her with the same student, and she was returned to court. This time, the consequences were severe. In 1998, she was sentenced to more than 7 years in prison. The case became a defining cultural moment. It highlighted how obsession, blurred boundaries, and lack of intervention turned a teacher into one of the most recognizable names in criminal news. During these years, major networks produced documentaries. Talk shows analyzed the psychology behind the relationship. Legal experts debated what the case meant for future boundaries in schools. Public opinion remained sharply divided, but one fact remained constant. The case never left the headlines. It became the blueprint for how modern media covers teacher misconduct. Letourneau was released from prison in 2004. In a move that stunned many, she and Fu Alao continued their relationship once he was an adult. They married in 2005, ensuring the case would once again return to national attention. Interviews, televised specials, and anniversary coverage kept the story alive for another decade. To some, it looked like a defiant insistence that their relationship had been destiny. To others, it served as a reminder of a deeply complicated and damaging situation that began long before the cameras ever arrived. In the years that followed, the marriage eventually deteriorated. Fu Alao filed for separation in 2017. Letourneau remained largely out of the public eye until 2020, when she died after a reported illness. Even then, media outlets revisited the case, documenting its influence on legal discussions, school policies, and public awareness. Today, the Mary Kay Letourneau case remains the single most recognizable teacher case in U.S. history. It reshaped conversations about power, responsibility, and the long-term consequences of violating professional boundaries. It also exposed how relentless media attention can transform a criminal case into a cultural phenomenon that spans generations. And as we move forward, the next case shows how manipulation, ambition, and a shocking crime inside a marriage created one of the first American trials to bring national audiences inside the courtroom minute by minute. Number 3, Pamela Smart. Her story didn't erupt from chaos or desperation. It started from ambition, the kind that looks polished on the outside, but hides fractures beneath. She dreamed of working in media, shaping stories, influencing narratives, and rising beyond the small New Hampshire town where she lived. But in a twist that still unsettles observers today, Smart didn't just chase stories. She became the center of one when investigators uncovered a plan that merged manipulation, a troubled marriage, and a crime that shocked the nation. Pamela Ann Smart was born in 1967 and grew up in a middle-class family where academic achievement was encouraged. She went to college, earned a communications degree, and quickly developed an intense interest in broadcasting. She idolized television personalities and saw herself as someone who belonged in front of a camera. By her early 20s, she was married to Greg Smart, a man she met at a concert, and the two seemed like a perfect match to friends. But that image unraveled almost immediately. Behind closed doors, their marriage was unstable. Reports later indicated they argued frequently, struggled with finances, and drifted apart emotionally. Pamela's career didn't take off the way she envisioned, and Greg's late-stage doubts about marriage added even more strain. Eventually, Pamela accepted a position as a media coordinator at a local high school. It wasn't the broadcasting dream she imagined, but it gave her a title, a sense of purpose, and visibility within the community. This is where the path began to shift. Smart met a group of students who admired her confidence and her knowledge of communications. Among them was 15-year-old Billy Flynn. He was impressionable, searching for direction, and fascinated by her. What started as mentorship quickly evolved into something far more complicated. According to later testimony, Smart blurred boundaries, encouraged emotional dependency, and used her influence to shift the dynamic from professional to personal. By early 1990, the situation inside the Smart household reached a breaking point. Greg discovered signs that Pamela had been unfaithful. Their relationship, already fragile, began collapsing under the weight of resentment and mistrust. Around this time, according to prosecutors, Pamela made statements to Flynn that would later become critical evidence. Witnesses testified that she suggested her marriage couldn't be fixed while Greg was still alive, and Flynn, overwhelmed by loyalty and infatuation, listened. The main incident unfolded on May 1st, 1990. Prosecutors later argued that Flynn and two friends entered the Smart residence while Greg was home. A struggle followed. Greg died at the scene. The teenagers fled, leaving behind a chaotic room and a trail of inconsistencies that would soon draw investigators into a deeper story. At first, Pamela Smart appeared devastated. She told police she returned home to find her husband dead. She spoke to reporters, gave emotional interviews, and positioned herself as a grieving wife caught in an unimaginable tragedy. But detectives noticed small cracks in her statements. Her tone seemed rehearsed, her details shifted, and there were rumors circulating through the school that she had been involved with Flynn. Investigators moved quickly, interviewing the teenagers repeatedly. Their stories changed over time, but one thing remained consistent. They all pointed back to her. Meanwhile, detectives recorded phone calls between Pamela and one of the teenage participants. In the tapes, they heard phrases that prosecutors later interpreted as attempts to influence testimony and conceal her involvement. These recordings became a turning point in the case. Once the story broke, the media seized on it instantly. A high school media coordinator, a troubled marriage, a group of teenagers, a murder planned in whispers. It was a case made for national attention. But what made it historic was the courtroom. For the first time in American history, a murder trial involving a school employee was broadcast gavel to gavel on live television. Millions of viewers watched each moment unfold in real time. Every objection, every witness, every fragment of evidence was displayed across America's living rooms. The courtroom outcome became one of the defining moments of early 1990s true crime coverage. Prosecutors portrayed Smart as a manipulator who used her influence over a vulnerable teenager to orchestrate her husband's death. The defense argued that the teenagers acted independently and that Pamela was being painted unfairly by boys seeking lighter sentences. But the tapes, the changing stories, and the emotional intensity of the trial worked against her. In March 1991, the jury returned a verdict. Pamela Smart was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and several related charges. She received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, making her one of the youngest women in New Hampshire to receive such a penalty. Her co-defendants, all teenagers at the time of the crime, received significantly shorter sentences after cooperating with prosecutors. In the aftermath, the case transformed into a cultural touchstone. Movies were made, books were written, documentaries aired repeatedly. To some, Smart became the face of manipulation and ambition pushed to the extreme. To others, she became a controversial figure whose trial was shaped too heavily by media influence. She has maintained her innocence for more than 3 decades, filing appeals and speaking through interviews, but none have altered her legal status. Today she remains incarcerated, and the case continues to spark debate. The televised trial set a template for true crime coverage for years to come. It demonstrated how public perception can shift rapidly once cameras enter the courtroom, and how a single case can reshape national discussions about boundaries, influence, and responsibility within schools. And as we move to the next case, we turn to a story where public reaction wasn't shaped by a murder plot or a courtroom broadcast, but by the power of appearance, tabloid culture, and a controversial phrase that followed the defendant everywhere. Number 4, Deborah LaFave. Number 4, her case didn't explode because investigators uncovered a complex scheme or because she attempted to evade the law. It went viral for a reason that exposed something uncomfortable about society itself: the extraordinary power of appearance. Before anyone read a court document or heard a witness, her booking photo alone turned a local Florida case into an international tabloid sensation, proving that sometimes the reaction to a crime overshadows the crime itself. Deborah Jean LaFave was born in 1980 and raised in the Tampa Bay area. She excelled in school, participated in extracurriculars, and carried herself with confidence. By the time she graduated college and became a middle school teacher, she was seen as someone who had her life in order, newly married, respected by colleagues, and trusted by parents. People described her as charismatic, outgoing, and unusually self-assured. Nothing in her professional history hinted at the scandal that would soon consume national attention. The turning path began in 2004, when reports surfaced that LaFave had formed an inappropriate relationship with a 14-year-old student. Investigators later stated that initial concerns arose when the student's mother noticed changes in her son's behavior and checked his phone. What she found triggered an immediate report to authorities. Detectives questioned the student, corroborated details through phone logs and witness accounts, and uncovered a timeline that pointed directly to LaFave. Once the investigation officially opened, events moved quickly. According to court records, detectives found multiple instances in which LaFave spent time with the student outside standard classroom contact. Witness accounts from the student and others helped fill in the sequence of events, painting a fuller picture of the dynamic. By June 2004, the evidence had built enough momentum that LaFave was arrested and charged with multiple felonies. The moment her mugshot was released, the narrative shifted dramatically. News outlets around the country began running the story not primarily because of the crime, but because of how she looked. Headlines emphasized her appearance more than the allegations. Talk shows replayed her photo repeatedly. Tabloids framed her as too attractive for prison, a phrase that would follow her for years. It was a startling example of how public perception can be distorted when aesthetics override facts. The main incident, as prosecutors outlined, centered on repeated misconduct between LaFave and the student across several locations. The charges were serious, the evidence substantial, and the circumstances deeply concerning for the community. But each time news networks attempted to focus on the details, the audience gravitated instead toward the spectacle built around her image. This imbalance became one of the most controversial aspects of the case. The investigation continued through the summer and fall of 2004. Detectives documented statements, secured communications, and gathered corroborating evidence. At each step, the media amplified the story beyond anything typical for teacher misconduct. Anchors debated whether her appearance influenced the tone of coverage. Experts questioned whether public sympathy or fascination would shape the legal outcome. And for many viewers, that became the central conflict, not what happened, but how the reaction differed from other cases involving similar facts. The courtroom phase intensified this divide. Prosecutors in Hillsborough County prepared the case with a focus on the documented interactions, witness accounts, and the legal framework surrounding teacher-student boundaries. The defense, however, argued that extensive publicity jeopardized LaFave's right to a fair trial. And in several interviews, including one that would become infamous, her attorney claimed that placing her in prison would be dangerous because she was too pretty, a comment that spiraled across TV screens worldwide. This claim ignited strong public backlash. It framed the case not around accountability, but around appearance-based assumptions. Some viewers believed the comment revealed an uncomfortable truth about society's biases. Others believed it minimized the severity of the allegations entirely. Either way, the remark solidified LaFave's case as one of the most media-distorted teacher stories in recent memory. In late 2005, LaFave accepted a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for avoiding prison, receiving probation, monitoring, and strict restrictions on her future employment. The agreement was controversial. Critics argued the sentence was too lenient given the seriousness of the conduct. Supporters of the deal said the intense publicity had already created extraordinary consequences for her and everyone involved. The case became a debate not only about legal outcomes, but about whether the media itself had influenced those outcomes. The aftermath extended for years. LaFave followed the conditions of her probation, underwent mandated evaluations, and maintained a low public profile. Reports indicate she later pursued work that did not involve minors and kept herself out of the public sphere as much as possible. But the cultural impact of the case continued. Journalists, academics, and legal experts often referenced her case when discussing how attractiveness, gender, and media framing affect public perception of crime. Beyond the legal resolution, LaFave's story forced a broader reckoning. It highlighted how quickly a narrative can be shaped by factors unrelated to evidence. It exposed the double standards in how society responds to male versus female offenders. And it demonstrated how the blending of tabloid culture with criminal reporting can distort both empathy and outrage. Today, the LaFave case stands as a study in the intersection between justice and media, a reminder that shaping public opinion can sometimes overshadow conveying the truth. The crime was serious, the consequences lasting, but the coverage became its own phenomenon, revealing more about society's biases than about the defendant herself. And as we move to the next case, we examine a situation where the issue wasn't public sympathy or image, but a repeated pattern across multiple schools, raising the question of how a system meant to protect students failed to stop the behavior sooner. Number 5, Jennifer Fichter. Her case didn't start with one shocking moment. It started with something far more dangerous: repetition, a repeated pattern that quietly unfolded across classrooms, campuses, and districts, each time slipping through cracks that should have stopped it. Instead of one opportunity for intervention, there were several, and each missed warning sign allowed the situation to grow until the consequences became impossible to ignore. Jennifer Fichter was born in 1984 and raised in Florida, where she developed an interest in teaching early on. Friends described her as outgoing, energetic, and determined to connect with her students. She graduated from college with a teaching degree, moved quickly into the profession, and earned praise for her ability to engage teenagers who struggled with confidence or motivation. On the surface, she represented everything a modern educator should be: young, relatable, and enthusiastic. But as investigators would later uncover, the qualities that made her appear approachable also contributed to boundaries becoming blurred. Fichter had a tendency to build unusually close relationships with certain students, often communicating late at night or outside traditional school channels. At first, these interactions were viewed as a teacher going above and beyond. Yet within those conversations were the earliest signs that her approach was drifting into unsafe territory. The turning path began in 2014 when officials in Polk County started receiving concerning information from parents. According to records, a mother discovered messages between Fichter and her teenage son that indicated their relationship had crossed into inappropriate territory. When confronted, the student admitted to investigators that the communication had escalated. Detectives quickly secured the student's phone, interviewed witnesses, and corroborated details that aligned with a timeline of misconduct. But what transformed the case into national news was not the initial discovery. It was the realization that Fichter's behavior had allegedly extended beyond a single student or a single school. As investigators dug deeper, additional information surfaced from multiple families. Patterns repeated, timelines overlapped, and law enforcement began compiling a list of incidents that painted a far larger picture than anyone expected. The main incidents, as outlined in charging documents, involved multiple teenagers across separate locations and months. Court records stated that Fichter used texting, private conversations, and moments outside structured school supervision to build personal attachments. Authorities later testified that she took advantage of her role as a trusted teacher to create secrecy around these interactions. The scale of the allegations shocked parents and educators alike. This wasn't a single lapse in judgment, it was a repeated cycle. Once the first charges were filed, the case exploded across Florida news and quickly reached national outlets. Reporters highlighted the number of victims, the detailed text exchanges, and the fact that at least 3 different sets of charges were filed, each representing distinct incidents. The public reacted strongly, questioning how a teacher could move between environments without earlier intervention. District officials faced immediate scrutiny. Were complaints ignored? Were behaviors misinterpreted as enthusiasm rather than warning signs? Those questions fueled the case's momentum from local scandal to national coverage. During the investigation phase, detectives meticulously collected digital evidence. They analyzed phone records, obtained interviews with multiple students, and tracked Fichter's movements across the documented timeline. Each new detail added another layer to the case. For law enforcement, the challenge was not locating evidence. It was organizing the volume of it. For the community, the challenge was understanding how this could have happened more than once. By the time the courtroom phase began in 2015, the case had become one of the most significant teacher-related prosecutions in Florida's history. Prosecutors filed more than 20 felony counts. Their narrative was clear. This was a repeated pattern of misconduct that only ended because a parent discovered the messages. They emphasized the breach of trust, the number of victims, and the deliberate actions that violated the responsibilities of a teacher. The defense acknowledged the seriousness of the situation, but attempted to focus on Fichter's emotional state and the argument that she needed treatment, not decades, in prison. They asked the court to consider her youth, her lack of prior criminal record, and her willingness to admit responsibility. But the prosecution argued that the breadth of the case required a strong response from the justice system to protect future students and send a clear message to schools. In April 2015, Fichter entered guilty pleas across multiple charges. The sentencing hearing became a major moment in Florida news. Parents, students, and community members filled the courtroom. Several families delivered statements describing the lasting emotional damage caused by the events. The judge, referencing the repeated nature of the misconduct, sentenced her to 22 years in prison, a sentence that reflected not just one incident, but a pattern that continued over time. After the sentencing, the case forced statewide discussions about teacher monitoring, reporting protocols, and digital communication policies. School districts across Florida reviewed training programs, implemented stricter rules about teacher-student contact, and invested in oversight tools to detect boundary violations earlier. For many educators, the Fichter case became a reminder that professional distance is not optional. It is a safeguard designed to protect everyone. In the aftermath, Fichter began serving her sentence in a Florida correctional facility. She will remain incarcerated for many years, with records indicating a release date far into the 2030s. Even after release, she will face long-term supervision and restrictions. The case continues to be cited in discussions about systemic failures, not just the actions of one individual, but the missed opportunities that allowed those actions to escalate. Today, the Jennifer Fichter case stands as one of the clearest examples of how repeated warning signs, if not identified early, can lead to widespread harm. It exposed weaknesses in school oversight and demonstrated how essential accountability structures must be. Her name is now associated not only with criminal wrongdoing, but with the question that still echoes in Florida. How many chances did the system have to stop this before it reached its breaking point? And as we move to the next case, we examine a situation where the spotlight didn't come from repetition or systemic gaps, but from a defendant whose background in sports entertainment turned a classroom scandal into a nationwide media frenzy. Number 6, Sarah Jones. Her case didn't ignite because of a complex investigation or a long-hidden pattern. It exploded because she lived two lives in full view of the public, one as a high school teacher and one as a professional NFL cheerleader. When those worlds collided, the story broke out of Kentucky instantly and traveled through sports networks, entertainment media, and national news, becoming one of the most widely discussed teacher scandals of the early 2010s. Sarah Elizabeth Jones was born in 1985 and raised in northern Kentucky. She excelled academically, volunteered in her community, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that made her stand out in every environment. By her mid-20s, she achieved a rare combination. She was both an English teacher and a cheerleader for the Cincinnati Bengals. For many people in her hometown, she represented the image of success. Young, driven, and polished. But the image concealed a path that was drifting toward a very public collapse. Jones had strong relationships with her students, often going out of her way to help those who struggled with writing or personal issues. Colleagues described her as approachable and supportive. Yet behind this positive exterior, investigators would later find that one particular connection crossed boundaries. The turning point came when rumors began circulating in 2011 and 2012 that Jones had developed an inappropriate relationship with a 17-year-old student at the school where she taught. The situation grew more complicated because Jones was already a public figure. Her role with the Bengals brought visibility, social media followers, and attention that few teachers ever experience. This combination made her personal life more accessible to the public and more difficult to keep private. When the rumors reached school administrators and law enforcement, they triggered a formal investigation. The main incident became clearer as detectives interviewed witnesses, reviewed phone records, and pieced together communication timelines. Evidence indicated that Jones had engaged in a relationship with the student while employed at the school. Because he was 17, near the threshold of adulthood, the case sat in a complicated legal space. But in Kentucky at the time, teachers were prohibited from having relationships with students, regardless of their age. That legal boundary was central to the charges. Once news broke in 2012, the story didn't behave like a normal local case. Sports networks picked it up immediately. Entertainment outlets ran it next. Then national news organizations followed. The contrast between her roles, educator and NFL cheerleader, fueled the story's momentum. Her public persona made the case feel larger, more sensational, and more culturally charged. It wasn't just a crime story anymore. It became a conversation about power, boundaries, and the intersections of fame and professionalism. The investigation phase continued through the summer, with detectives gathering digital evidence and interviewing those close to both Jones and the student. Reports indicated that communication had taken place outside school hours and off campus. The prosecution built its case around Kentucky's laws governing teacher-student relationships, emphasizing that authority figures must maintain clear and consistent professional boundaries regardless of circumstances. When the courtroom phase began, public interest was already enormous. Cameras were outside the courthouse every day. Media outlets analyzed her appearance, her background, and her dual careers. The defense argued that the student had been willing, that the age difference was small, and that the fallout had already destroyed her reputation. But the prosecution focused on the legal principle that teachers hold positions of trust and that trust cannot be compromised. Then came the decisive moment. In October 2012, Jones reached a plea agreement. She pled guilty to misdemeanor charges, avoided jail time, and received probation along with restrictions on future employment. The judge emphasized the seriousness of her role as a teacher, but acknowledged factors that influenced the sentencing. Immediately after the hearing, Jones gave a public statement that drew significant attention because it addressed the relationship directly. She stated that the student had not been harmed and asked the media to respect his privacy. Her comments sparked debate, with some seeing remorse and others seeing justification. The aftermath took the case in another direction entirely. Instead of fading from view, Jones became a media personality. She appeared on national talk shows, gave interviews about her perspective, and discussed her frustration with how the law handled cases involving older teenagers. Her public profile shifted from defendant to commentator, adding yet another layer to a story already shaped by fame. Meanwhile, the case continued to impact discussions about teacher conduct nationwide. Schools revisited their policies on communication between teachers and students. Districts tightened rules on social media. Lawmakers debated whether existing boundaries were clear enough. For many educators, the Sarah Jones case served as a warning about how quickly professional lines can dissolve and how devastating the consequences can be. Jones eventually married the former student, a development that reignited public discussion. Supporters argued it validated her long-standing claim that they had a genuine connection. Critics argued it blurred the legal and ethical questions even further. Either way, the marriage kept her name in the news for years beyond the courtroom. Today, Sarah Jones lives largely outside the spotlight, though the legacy of her case remains. It demonstrated how celebrity status magnifies every detail of a criminal investigation, how social media intensifies public judgment, and how quickly narratives can be shaped by perception rather than evidence. Her case marked a friction point between personal relationships, legal definitions, and public expectations of those in positions of authority. And as we move to the next case, we look at a story where the media didn't chase glamour or spectacle. It focused instead on the unexpected confession of a teacher who walked into a police station and voluntarily exposed the truth before anyone knew what she had done. Number 7. Melissa Huckabee. This case didn't begin with a missing person alert or a suspicious witness. It began with trust. Trust built inside a church, inside a family community, and inside a neighborhood where everyone believed the people around them were safe. When investigators finally uncovered the truth, the greatest shock wasn't the crime itself. It was who committed it and where it happened. Melissa Ann Huckabee was born in 1981 and grew up deeply involved in church life. She struggled with emotional instability throughout her early adulthood, but presented herself as a devoted mother and someone who cared about children. By 2009, she was living in the small, quiet community of Tracy, California, where her grandfather served as pastor of a local church. Huckabee volunteered as a Sunday school teacher, watched neighborhood kids play outside, and carried herself as someone who belonged at the center of a trusting faith community. To neighbors, she was polite but distant, a woman who often seemed overwhelmed yet eager to appear responsible. She lived just steps away from where children played daily, and for families in the mobile home park, nothing suggested danger. If anything, Huckabee appeared to be someone who loved children and took her church obligations seriously. That perception would soon collapse entirely. The turning path began on March 27, 2009, when 8-year-old Sandra Cantu was last seen on surveillance footage, skipping happily past Huckabee's home. The disappearance triggered an immediate community search. Police officers, volunteers, neighbors, parents, everyone joined in. Huckabee inserted herself into conversations, asked questions, and spoke to reporters. She even handed police a bizarre clue, a torn note she claimed to have found, suggesting that Sandra had been taken and held for ransom. The handwriting, investigators later discovered, matched her own. That moment, the delivery of the note, became the first crack in a story that would unravel quickly. As the search intensified, investigators noticed inconsistencies in Huckabee's statements. She claimed she had lost a suitcase earlier that day. Then she said it had been stolen. Then she changed details again. The shifting explanations triggered suspicion. Detectives quietly began examining her movements, her phone records, and her access to locations around the church. 10 days after Sandra went missing, the main incident revealed itself in a devastating way. A suitcase was found in an irrigation pond near Tracy. Inside was Sandra, and the suitcase belonged to Huckabee. The discovery redirected the entire investigation. Search efforts shifted to collecting physical evidence, establishing timelines, and understanding the events leading to Sandra's death. Investigators began scrutinizing Huckabee's home and the church where she taught. Court records indicated that the crime occurred inside the church, the one place families believed was unquestionably safe. The revelation stunned the community. A Sunday school teacher, inside a house of worship, had committed an act no one could reconcile with the environment she belonged to. The investigation and unraveling gained speed. Detectives interviewed Huckabee repeatedly. Each interview produced new inconsistencies. She broke down emotionally, shifted her story, denied involvement, then hinted at personal turmoil. Forensic teams found evidence inside the church that connected her to the crime. A key discovery was that the suitcase she claimed had been stolen contained fibers, prints, and physical traces linking her to the victim. Digital evidence and witness interviews added even more weight. She had texted Sandra's mother shortly before the disappearance, asking if the girl could come over to play. Investigators later highlighted this message as a key piece of the timeline. Meanwhile, Huckabee's prior medical and psychological history became part of the prosecution's narrative, showing a pattern of instability that concerned investigators. Huckabee was arrested on April 10, 2009, and prosecutors charged her with kidnapping and first-degree murder, along with additional serious charges. They emphasized the betrayal of trust, a Sunday school teacher using the church as a setting for harm, a neighbor violating the safety of children she interacted with daily, and a community blindsided by someone they believed posed no threat. Prosecutors initially pursued the death penalty. However, the trial never unfolded publicly. Instead, more than a year later in May 2010, Huckabee accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to murder and kidnapping in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. During her sentencing in June 2010, prosecutors outlined the emotional impact of the crime and the disturbing breach of trust. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom reaction was heavy, emotional, and filled with disbelief. Even with the plea, the community struggled to understand her motivations. Huckabee herself gave no clear explanation. She apologized but offered no detailed account of why it happened. That lack of clarity left a permanent fracture in the community. In the aftermath, the church reevaluated safety protocols. Families became more cautious, and Tracy, California, carried the weight of a tragedy that unfolded in the last place anyone expected. Huckabee was transferred to a California correctional facility, where she remains today, serving a life sentence. The case continues to appear in documentaries and legal discussions because it challenges assumptions about danger. It wasn't a stranger or a drifter or someone with a criminal record. It was a trusted teacher, inside a trusted place, acting in ways no one imagined. Number 8. Erin McAuliffe. Her case shows how a single image can outrun the facts. Before investigators held a press conference, before court documents were filed, and before the public understood what happened, one mugshot flashed across social media, and within hours, a North Carolina teacher, went from unknown to headline material nationwide. It was a reminder of how quickly perception can form when a striking image arrives before the full story. Erin Elizabeth McAuliffe was born in 1994 and grew up in a small, tight-knit community. She was academically strong, gifted in mathematics, and known for being analytical and introverted. After graduating college, she worked briefly in finance before pivoting toward education. At 25 years old, she accepted a position at Rocky Mount Preparatory School, a public charter school in Rocky Mount, where she taught math and tutored students who needed extra structure or individual attention. She appeared confident, ambitious, and eager to establish herself in the profession. Students described her as patient and good at explaining complicated topics. Colleagues viewed her as someone adjusting well to the demands of teaching. She blended into the rhythm of school life, with no disciplinary issues and no complaints, at least none that were visible on the surface. But like many cases of misconduct within educational environments, the warning signs were subtle and easy to overlook until they converged into something unmistakable. The turning path began in 2017 when administrators received information suggesting McAuliffe had formed inappropriate connections with multiple students. These concerns did not stem from a single dramatic event. Instead, they originated from conversations among students, unusual communication patterns, and inconsistencies in reports about interactions outside normal classroom settings. School officials took the information seriously and contacted authorities, triggering an investigation that would soon escalate far beyond anyone's expectations. Rocky Mount police detectives began interviewing students and reviewing the digital evidence available. Investigators reported that 3 male students, 2 17-year-olds and 1 16-year-old, described a pattern of off-campus interactions with McAuliffe. Their accounts aligned closely enough to raise immediate concern. Phone records, social media exchanges, and witness statements helped confirm that boundaries had been crossed, and the allegations quickly solidified into formal charges. The main incidents, as outlined by prosecutors, involved McAuliffe meeting students outside school grounds during late hours. These meetings, according to charging documents, represented clear violations of professional guidelines and state law regarding teacher-student relationships. While none of the allegations involved violence, they represented a breach of trust that the justice system views as extremely serious due to the power imbalance inherent in education. Once investigators finished collecting evidence, they arrested McAuliffe in June 2017. And this is where the case pivoted into something far larger than a typical local crime story. Her mugshot, striking, well-lit, and emotionally unreadable, was released almost immediately. Within minutes, it spread across social platforms, often stripped of context. People reacted to the image before they reacted to the facts. The photograph became a viral curiosity, turning a regional case into a national topic overnight. This element made the case unusual. The viral attention didn't begin with the charges or the timeline. It began with aesthetics, comment sections filled with speculation, jokes, and heated debates. News outlets scrambled to catch up, publishing details only after the image had already created public perception. It was a modern example of how social media can distort the sequence of understanding. The reaction came before the information. As the investigation became public, police provided a detailed summary of the allegations, emphasizing the number of victims and the seriousness of the violations. The school announced her termination and cooperated fully with detectives. Parents in the Rocky Mount community expressed shock and frustration, with many asking how such conduct could develop unnoticed. School administrators responded by reviewing communication protocols, supervision requirements, and reporting mechanisms. When the courtroom phase began, the viral nature of the case influenced the atmosphere. Reporters attended hearings. News outlets continued analyzing the mugshot. Analysts debated whether media fascination had overshadowed the gravity of the charges. Prosecutors focused on the facts: 3 students, repeated misconduct, and clear boundary violations. They highlighted the responsibility teachers hold and the importance of protecting minors from inappropriate influence. The defense acknowledged the public scrutiny surrounding the case, but emphasized that McAuliffe had no prior criminal history. They argued that the intense media coverage, driven almost entirely by her image, created a distorted narrative that complicated her ability to be seen fairly. but the evidence remained substantial, and the court moved forward accordingly. In late 2017, McAuliffe accepted a plea agreement on multiple felony charges. She received a suspended sentence, supervised probation, mandated counseling, and restrictions on future employment. The judge emphasized the seriousness of her actions and the number of victims, but acknowledged that she had cooperated with the process. Despite avoiding prison, the long-term consequences were severe: permanent registration requirements and a complete inability to work in education again. The aftermath continued to spark discussion. Many argued that the viral mugshot overshadowed the actual harm done. Others claimed the attention highlighted the double standards in how society reacts to misconduct depending on gender and appearance. The case became a recurring reference point when discussing how social media can shape or distort public understanding of criminal allegations. Today, Erin McAuliffe lives outside public view, far removed from the viral moment that defined her downfall. But her case remains a modern example of how quickly a local investigation can become a national story when a single image captures public attention before the facts do. It also underscores the importance of maintaining strict professional boundaries, especially in a digital era where communication is constant and easily hidden. And as we move to the next case, we shift from a single teacher to the rare situation where two educators were charged together, a scandal that stunned Louisiana and triggered one of the most sensational headlines of the decade. Number 9, Rachel Respes and Shelley Dufresne. Most teacher cases unfold around one educator and one student. This one shattered every expectation. When news broke that two Louisiana teachers, colleagues and friends, were accused of being involved with the same underage student during the same encounter, the country reacted with disbelief. Even seasoned investigators admitted they had never seen anything like it. And that rarity alone turned a regional case into one of the most viral scandals of the decade. Shelley Dufresne was born in 1982 and raised in a respected family in St. Charles Parish. She taught English at Destrehan High School and was known as organized, upbeat, and admired by students. She also came from a family deeply tied to the local justice system. Her father was a well-known judge, which gave her a reputation for professionalism and high expectations. Few imagined she would ever be linked to a criminal case, let alone one that drew national headlines. Rachel Respes, born in 1990, was the newer teacher of the two. Younger, quieter, and still shaping her identity as an educator, Respes taught English as well. Students saw her as friendly and approachable. She and Dufresne, close in age and subject area, quickly became friends at work, often seen talking between classes or sharing planning time. To colleagues, they were simply two teachers navigating their careers. But beneath that routine, a boundary collapse was forming. According to investigators, both teachers developed an inappropriate connection with a 16-year-old male student, a dynamic hidden from staff, administrators, and parents. The turning path became visible in September 2014, when rumors circulated among students after a weekend gathering. The details were alarming, unusual, and inconsistent with anything school officials had encountered before. Administrators acted quickly once the allegations reached them, contacting authorities the same day. The main incident, according to charging documents, occurred after a football game when the student met with both teachers at Respes' apartment. Prosecutors later stated that the encounter involved all three individuals and that the student provided a detailed account that investigators found credible after reviewing digital messages and communications. The fact that two teachers were involved in the same incident was unprecedented for local law enforcement and for most of the country. Once police confirmed enough information to proceed, both teachers were arrested. Their mugshots appeared side by side on every major news outlet. The case exploded instantly. Talk shows debated it. Late-night hosts referenced it. Tabloids ran it for weeks. The shock factor, two teachers, one student, same encounter, drove the story's momentum far more than the legal details did. The investigation intensified as detectives analyzed phone records, text exchanges, and testimonies. Authorities emphasized that the power imbalance was undeniable. Two educators with authority over a minor. The unusual nature of the case meant investigators had to reconstruct the timeline carefully, ensuring each allegation could be independently corroborated. Meanwhile, the school district placed both teachers on immediate leave, and parents demanded answers about how such an incident could occur without detection. During the courtroom phase, the legal strategies of the two teachers diverged. Shelley Dufresne faced the most serious charges, including felony accusations tied to the encounter. Prosecutors argued that she breached her professional duties in the most blatant way possible. Her defense focused on procedural concerns, her personal history, and mitigating factors related to the student's age. Louisiana law, however, made clear that teachers cannot engage in relationships with students under any circumstances, regardless of age or perceived willingness. Rachel Respess, on the other hand, faced charges related to failing to report misconduct and allowing inappropriate behavior to occur in her home. Her legal exposure was significant, but not identical to Dufresne's. Respess's defense argued she was overwhelmed, inexperienced, and did not fully anticipate the consequences of her actions. Prosecutors countered that her obligations as a teacher were clear, regardless of her age or experience level. The media closely followed every development. Analysts noted the cultural double standard in how female offenders are often framed differently from male offenders. Others emphasized the responsibility teachers have, especially when two adults reinforce each other's bad decisions instead of acting as safeguards. The case became a study in collective wrongdoing, how shared poor judgment can accelerate a situation into criminal territory. The legal outcomes unfolded across multiple years and jurisdictions. In April 2015, Shelley Dufresne pleaded guilty in St. Charles Parish to reduced obscenity charges, receiving probation and mental health treatment while avoiding prison. However, she still faced separate charges in Jefferson Parish, where prosecutors alleged additional incidents had occurred. That case went to trial in 2017, resulting in her acquittal. Rachel Respess's path diverged significantly. Prosecutors ultimately dropped the failure to report charges against her in June 2017. Despite the varied legal resolutions, both women lost their teaching careers permanently and faced lasting consequences within their community. In the aftermath, Destrehan High School confronted difficult questions. Administrators implemented stricter monitoring measures, reviewed staff-student boundaries, and reinforced training around reporting obligations. Parents expressed relief that the legal proceedings had concluded, but remained unsettled by the idea that two teachers had simultaneously violated professional norms. For the community, the scandal lingered as a reminder of how quickly trust can collapse when boundaries are ignored. Today, both women live outside the public eye, unable to return to teaching and carrying the lasting reputational impact of one of the most sensational teacher scandals in recent memory. Their names remain linked to the rare situation where misconduct was not the result of one individual's decisions, but a collective failure between colleagues who should have stopped each other long before law enforcement intervened. And as we move to the final case, we examine a story shaped not by viral shock or public spectacle, but by allegations of institutional silence, a case where a teacher's misconduct collided with claims of cover-ups within a religious school system. Number 10. Brianne Altice. Some teacher cases shock because they happen once. This one shook the country because it didn't stop. Long before police arrested her, long before court hearings filled news broadcasts, Altice was living a double life. One built on charm and trust at school, and another concealed behind late-night messages, secret meetings, and a pattern that grew until investigators uncovered the full scope. Brianne Lee Altice was born in 1979 and grew up in Utah, where she built a quiet reputation as disciplined and academically driven. She married young, earned her degree, and went into teaching with a strong belief that she could help students who struggled. By the time she began working at Davis High School, she had become the kind of teacher students gravitated toward: confident, stylish, and good at explaining difficult material. Many described her as the cool teacher, the one teenagers felt comfortable talking to. But beneath that friendly exterior, investigators later learned, she blurred boundaries far more than anyone realized. Altice often spent extra time with students, offered personalized attention, and developed friendships that drifted beyond professional lines. At first, nothing appeared alarming. She was popular, outgoing, and well-liked. Yet those qualities, when combined with students close in age to adulthood, created an environment where boundaries could be crossed quietly. The turning path began when school administrators received a report in late 2013 suggesting Altis might be involved in an inappropriate relationship with a male student. The allegation was vague at first, but as officials began asking questions, they noticed inconsistencies, students giving hesitant answers, parents reporting unusual behavior, and rumors circulating in hallways. Administrators contacted police, triggering what would become one of Utah's most widely publicized educator investigations. Detectives interviewed the first student, a 16-year-old, and his statement laid out details investigators found credible and concerning. According to his account, the relationship had developed gradually through private conversations, texting, and after-school meetings. Digital evidence and witness sightings supported his timeline. But as detectives traced her communications, another pattern emerged. A second student came forward, then a third. This was the moment the case transformed from a serious allegation into a statewide scandal. The main incidents, according to prosecutors, involved 3 teenage boys between the ages of 16 and 17. Each described a similar progression: emotional closeness, late-night messages, meetings beyond school hours, and secret interactions that escalated into misconduct. Investigators stated that Altis used her role as a trusted teacher to gain influence over them, creating connections that students were not equipped to navigate. When police arrested her in October 2013, the community reaction was immediate. Parents were stunned, students were divided, some insisted it was impossible, while others had noticed unusual behavior months earlier. As more details emerged, Utah news outlets began reporting the number of victims, the digital trails uncovered by police, and the repeated nature of the conduct. Within days, the story spread nationally. The investigation expanded as detectives examined phone records, text logs, and statements from peers who had witnessed interactions. Prosecutors emphasized the pattern: not a single lapse, but repeated violations that continued even after suspicion had already surfaced. In interviews, one detective described the case as a progression of blurred boundaries escalating over time. As charges mounted, Altis was removed from her teaching position and placed under strict court conditions. But the media coverage intensified, focusing on the contradictions. A respected teacher with a stable career, yet multiple victims. A married woman living a seemingly normal life, yet messages and actions that told a different story. The contrast fueled public fascination. When the courtroom phase began in 2015, the case drew large crowds and national attention. Prosecutors filed several felony counts, including charges related to unlawful sexual activity with minors. Their strategy focused heavily on the pattern: the repeated contact, the emotional manipulation, and the breach of professional trust. They argued that Altis exploited her authority and that the boys were influenced by her status as an adult they admired. The defense countered by emphasizing her personal struggles, including marital issues and emotional instability. They also attempted to argue that the students were close to adulthood, but prosecutors reminded the court that Utah law explicitly prohibits teachers from engaging in relationships with students of any age under their authority, regardless of willingness. A pivotal moment came when one student testified in court, describing how the relationship affected him emotionally and academically. That testimony, combined with digital evidence, strengthened the prosecution's case significantly. Faced with mounting evidence, Altis accepted a plea agreement in 2015. She pled guilty to 3 felony charges, one for each student. During the sentencing hearing, the judge spoke about the lasting impact on the victims, the betrayal of trust, and the severity of a teacher repeatedly violating boundaries meant to protect students. He noted that Altis had multiple opportunities to stop but chose not to. She was sentenced to 2 to 30 years in state prison, with the judge recommending she serve substantial time. The courtroom reaction was intense. Some felt the sentence was appropriate given the scale of the case. Others argued it highlighted the double standards and seriousness society places on educator misconduct. Either way, the ruling marked one of the harshest sentences for a female teacher in U.S. history. In the aftermath, Davis School District implemented new training modules, restricted private communication between teachers and students, and created stricter reporting systems for boundary concerns. Altis's case became a reference point in national discussions about teacher-student relationships and how authority can complicate consent, even when students are near adulthood. Brianne Altice was released on parole in September 2019 after serving approximately 56 months in prison. She completed required programs during her incarceration and now resides in Utah under parole supervision and is listed on the state's sex offender registry. Her case endures as one of the most notorious educator misconduct cases in the country, notable not only for its severity, but for the disturbing pattern that unfolded long before investigators intervened.